Get up. You cannot sleep here. The words cut through the February darkness like a blade, sharp enough to pull Elwood Ray Crenshaw from the shallow sleep he had learned to survive on. He opened his eyes to flashlight glare and the silhouette of a police officer standing over him, breath fogging in the bitter cold. "Yes, sir," Crenshaw said, and his voice came out hoarse from disuse. He was already moving before the words finished leaving his mouth, folding the olive green blanket with corners so precise the officer paused for half a second, watching hands that moved with unusual purpose for a man sleeping in a doorway. The courthouse entrance had seemed like salvation 6 hours earlier when the storm rolled in. Concrete overhang, walls on 3 sides blocking the wind. A man could survive a night like this in a spot like that if he knew how to position himself, and Elwood Crenshaw knew. He had slept in worse places than this. He had slept in mountains where the temperature dropped so far below zero that his eyelids froze shut. He had slept in jungles where things with too many legs crawled across his face. A courthouse doorway in February was practically a hotel room, but it was still trespassing. The officer watched him gather his possessions. There were not many. A rucksack that had seen better decades, packed with the kind of deliberate organization that suggested military service or mental illness or both. A sleeping bag rated for temperatures this city never saw, its olive drab fabric faded but still functional, and the blanket now folded into a perfect rectangle that Crenshaw tucked into the top of his pack. "You a veteran?" the officer asked. It was not really a question. Something in the way the old man moved had given it away. The economy of motion. The way he stood once he was upright, weight balanced, shoulders back despite the donated brown corduroy jacket hanging 2 sizes too large on his gaunt frame. "Yes, sir. Navy. 23 years. The officer nodded slowly. His own father had done 12 years in the Army before his knees gave out. He knew what service looked like even when it was wrapped in clothes from a church donation bin. "Look, I have to take you in. Trespassing complaint from the night security. But it is a misdemeanor. You will probably be out by afternoon." "I understand, sir." The sir landed with weight. Not sarcastic. Not performative. Just automatic like breathing. Muscle memory from 4 decades of addressing authority with respect regardless of whether that respect was earned or deserved. The transport van smelled of sweat and stale cigarettes, and something chemical that was supposed to be disinfectant. Crenshaw sat on the metal bench, wrists in cuffs that were too tight but not worth mentioning, and watched the city slide past through the mesh-covered windows. He had been in vehicles like this before, though those had been military transport, and he had been the one with the weapon rather than the one in restraints. Processing took 2 hours. Fingerprints pressed onto digital scanners. The same fingers that had once held the steadiest rifle in naval special warfare, now recorded in a database of minor criminals and public nuisances. Mugshot taken against a height chart. The same face that had briefed admirals and been briefed by generals. Now, just another booking photo in an endless stream of them. The intake officer inventoried his possessions with the bored efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. 1 rucksack, olive drab, contents as follows. 1 sleeping bag, military issue. 1 blanket wool. 1 photograph, laminated, showing approximately 12 individuals in military attire. 1 radio, appears non-functional. 2 sets of dog tags. She paused at the last item, lifted the chains from the evidence bag, and let the tags hang, spinning slowly. 2 sets, she repeated. Crenshaw watched them turn. The metal caught the fluorescent light. His own tags were worn but legible. The second set was older, smoother, the edges rounded by years of handling. If you looked closely, and the intake officer did not, you could see dark traces in the grooves of the stamped letters. Traces that would not wash out no matter how many times they were cleaned. "Yes, ma'am." The second set belonged to a friend. She noted it on her form and sealed the tags in a plastic bag. Crenshaw watched them disappear into a bin with the rest of his life, and something tightened in his chest that he had learned to ignore a long time ago. The holding area was concrete and fluorescent lights, and the particular smell of institutional despair. A dozen men waited on benches for their turn before a judge, most of them avoiding eye contact, all of them wearing the same expression of defeated resignation. Crenshaw took a seat in the corner where he could see both exits and sat with his back straight and his hands folded in his lap. The other men gave him space without being asked. Something about the old man in the oversized jacket unsettled them in ways they could not articulate. He was too still, too calm. His eyes moved in patterns that tracked movement with an alertness that seemed wrong for someone who should have been broken by circumstance. Hours passed. Names were called. Men shuffled out and did not return. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless single note. Crenshaw waited with the patience of a man who had once lain motionless in a sniper hide for 63 hours, waiting for a single shot that would change the course of an operation. He thought about Joaquin. He usually did in quiet moments. The weight of those second tags, even when they were sealed in an evidence bag somewhere in this building, still pressed against his chest like a phantom limb. If you're watching from anywhere in the world right now, we would love to know where you're joining us from. Drop a comment below and tell us your city or country. Stories like this one, about hidden heroes and quiet courage, they happen in every community. Maybe even yours. Maybe there is someone in your neighborhood right now whose appearance hides something extraordinary. If these stories speak to you, consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more of them. Now let us continue. Crenshaw, Elwood R. Transport to courtroom 7. He rose from the bench with a precision that made the guard blink. Stood at something that was not quite attention, but close enough to make the man reassess what he was looking at. But what the officers escorting him down that fluorescent corridor did not know, what no one in that courthouse yet understood, was that in exactly 4 hours, a 31-year judicial career would end in courtroom 7. And it would begin with a pair of dog tags that a judge would call fake. And it would end with coordinates that would freeze an entire room into silence. Because some dog tags are not souvenirs. Some dog tags are earned in blood that never fully washes away. And Elwood Ray Crenshaw had earned his twice over, once for himself and once for the brother who died his arms on a mountainside half a world away. The guard opened the door to the transport corridor. Crenshaw walked through it, and the clock started counting down. The transport corridor stretched ahead of him, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and with each step Elwood Crenshaw felt the years folding backward. It happened sometimes in moments of stillness or stress. The present would thin like worn fabric, and the past would bleed through, vivid and unforgiving. He was not walking toward a courtroom anymore. He was walking toward a helicopter, rotors already spinning, the Hindu Kush mountains rising like broken teeth against a sky the color of gunmetal. March 2001. The air tasted like dust and cordite and something else, something that smelled like the end of everything he thought he understood about himself. Joaquin was beside him, always beside him. 11 years they had worked together, spotter and shooter, two halves of something that only made sense as a whole. Joaquin Delgado Montoya, with his quick grin and quicker calculations, the man who could read wind like other people read street signs, who had saved Crenshaw's life so many times they had stopped counting somewhere around the 6th deployment. "You're thinking too loud, Woody." Joaquin's voice in his memory, clear as the day it was spoken. "We go in, we do the job, we come home." Same as always. But it was not the same as always. Crenshaw had known it then, some instinct honed by 2 decades of operating in places where instinct was the difference between breathing and bleeding out. The intelligence was too clean, the timeline too tight. Everything about Operation Nightfall felt like a trap waiting to spring. He had said nothing. That was the part that still woke him at 3 in the morning, 24 years later. He had felt the wrongness in his bones, and he had said nothing because the mission was the mission and doubt was not something you voiced when the helicopter was already lifting off. The guard's hand on his shoulder snapped him back to the present. Crenshaw blinked, reorienting. Courthouse. February. Handcuffs. The smell of industrial cleaner instead of mountain air. "You okay, old-timer?" the guard asked. There was something approaching concern in his voice. Crenshaw had stopped walking without realizing it, frozen in the middle of the corridor with his eyes focused on something that was not there. "Yes, sir. Just thinking." They kept moving. But the past kept pace alongside them, patient as a shadow. The insertion had been textbook. For hours of hiking through terrain that would kill an unprepared man in a dozen different ways. Crenshaw and Joaquin moving in the particular rhythm they had developed over a decade of working together. Communication reduced to hand signals and glances because words were unnecessary between them. They reached the overwatch position as dawn started painting the peaks in shades of gold and red, and Crenshaw settled into his hide with the Barrett M82 already shouldered, scope already trained on the compound below. The target was a high-value asset whose name Crenshaw still could not speak even in his own mind. Classified so deep that the operation officially never happened, conducted by men who officially did not exist, in a country where America officially had no presence. Joaquin sat up beside him, spotting scope deployed, notebook open for calculations. Wind from the east, he murmured. 6 miles per hour, gusting to 10. Range confirmed at 1,847 meters. It was the longest shot Crenshaw had ever attempted. At that distance, the bullet would be in the air for nearly 3 seconds. The target would have time to take 2 full breaths between the trigger pull and the impact. Everything had to be perfect. The hold, the squeeze, the follow-through. And it was. The shot was perfect. The target dropped. And then everything went wrong. Crenshaw's hands were shaking now, in the present, as the guard led him into a waiting area outside the courtrooms. He folded them together to hide the tremor, a technique he had learned in the years since that mountainside, when his body remembered what his mind tried to forget. The enemy response had been immediate and overwhelming. Not a patrol stumbling onto their position. Not random chance. They had known. Someone had talked, or the intelligence had been compromised from the start, or it was simply the kind of bad luck that happened in war when you played the odds long enough. RPGs and automatic weapons fire from 3 directions, pinning them in a position that had suddenly become a kill box. Joaquin had grabbed his arm. Go. I will cover. Those were the rules. Shooter displaces, spotter covers. They had drilled it 1,000 times. But something in Crenshaw had resisted, some instinct screaming that this was different, that if he left this position, he would never see his friend alive again. Joaquin had shoved him. Go, Woody. Now. That is an order. So he had gone, scrambling down the ridge toward the extraction point while Joaquin's rifle barked behind him, drawing fire, buying time with bullets and borrowed seconds. He was 200 meters away when the RPG hit. The sound was something he would never forget. The whistle and the impact and the silence that followed, worse than any scream. He turned back without thinking, training abandoned, and found Joaquin in the rocks with his chest opened up and his blood soaking into the Afghan dirt. 94 seconds. That was how long it took. Crenshaw held him the entire time, applying pressure that both of them knew was useless, watching the life drain out of the only person who had ever truly understood what they did and why they did it. Not your fault, Woody. Joaquin's voice was barely a whisper, blood bubbling at the corners of his mouth. Never your fault. Tell my sister I tried. And then he was gone. Crenshaw sat in the waiting area outside courtroom 7 with his back straight and his eyes fixed on nothing. The guard had removed his handcuffs and left them on a bench, one of 6 men waiting for their cases to be called. The others fidgeted and muttered and checked the clock on the wall. Crenshaw sat motionless, hands folded, breathing steady. Inside, he was still on that mountainside. He had never really left. The years after were a blur of ceremonies and condolences and medals pinned to his chest by men who had never held a dying friend in their arms. Silver Star for gallantry in action. 2 more bronze stars. Another Purple Heart to add to the collection. Master Chief Petty Officer Elwood Crenshaw, one of the most decorated snipers in the history of naval special warfare. None of it mattered. None of it brought Joaquin back. He retired in 2003. Medical discharge, though the wounds that ended his career were not the kind that showed up on x-rays. His wife left in 2007, worn down by years of trying to reach a man who was not really there. His daughter stopped calling in 2015, tired of conversations that went nowhere with a father who could not explain why he was broken. The money ran out eventually. The apartment followed. And one day, Elwood Crenshaw found himself sleeping under a bridge with a rucksack containing everything he owned. And he did not fight it, because some part of him believed this was exactly what he deserved. But every day, no matter where he slept, or what he ate, or whether he ate at all, he walked to the Navy Memorial. He found Joaquin's name on the wall. He traced the letters with fingers that had once been the steadiest in the teams. Still here, brother. Still trying. The courtroom door opened. A clerk stepped out with a clipboard. Crenshaw, Elwood. You're up. He rose from the bench and walked toward the door. Somewhere on the other side, a judge was waiting who thought he knew everything about the old man in donated clothes. A judge who believed appearance told the whole story. He was about to learn otherwise. The courtroom smelled like old wood and older authority. Crenshaw stepped through the door and immediately cataloged everything, a process so automatic after 40 years that he could not have stopped it if he tried. 2 exits, the main door behind him and a side door near the judge's bench. 14 people in the gallery, mostly waiting for their own cases, a few who looked like family members of other defendants. Bailiff stationed 6 feet from the bench, right hand resting near his belt out of habit. Stenographer at her machine, fingers poised. American flag hanging limp against the wall. State flag beside it. Seal of the court mounted behind the elevated bench where the judge sat like a king surveying peasants. Judge Vernon T. Ashcroft III looked exactly like his reputation suggested. Silver hair pomaded back with precision. Reading glasses worn low on his nose so he could peer over them at defendants. A theatrical choice designed to convey disapproval before a single word was spoken. Custom-tailored robes that probably cost more than Crenshaw had earned in his first 3 years of Navy service. Manicured hands holding a Mont Blanc pen, making notes on the file before him with the casual authority of a man who had never once questioned whether he deserved his position. Crenshaw walked to the defendant's podium and stood with his weight balanced, shoulders back, chin level. The posture was automatic. Decades of standing before superior officers had carved it into his muscle memory so deeply that not even 4 years of sleeping under bridges could erode it. The bailiff noticed. Terence Okafor had worked this courtroom for 12 years, long enough to have seen every kind of defendant walk through those doors. Gang members who slouched with practiced indifference. White-collar criminals who stood too straight, overcompensating. Addicts who could not stop moving. Domestic abusers who smiled too much. He had learned to read people the way a hunter reads tracks, looking for the small details that revealed the larger truth. The old man in the donated jacket was wrong. Not wrong in a dangerous way. Not wrong in a way that made Okafor reach for his weapon. Wrong in a way that did not match. Homeless men did not stand like that. Homeless men did not move with that particular economy, each motion precise and purposeful. Homeless men did not survey a room with eyes that tracked every potential threat and exit within the first 3 seconds of entry. Okafor had served 2 tours in Iraq with the Marine Corps. He knew what operators looked like, even when they were wearing clothes from a church donation bin. He filed the observation away and kept watching. At the bench, Judge Ashcroft finished his notes and looked up. His gaze swept over Crenshaw the way it swept over every defendant, cataloging and dismissing in a single glance. The oversized jacket, the pants held up with rope, the work boots with separated soles, the unkempt beard, though if Ashcroft had looked closer he might have noticed it was neater than it should have been, trimmed with the kind of care that suggested discipline rather than vanity. He saw none of that. He saw what he expected to see, and what he expected to see was another homeless vagrant wasting the court's time and the taxpayers' money. Case number 7429, the clerk announced. People versus Elwood Ray Crenshaw. Trespassing in the first degree. Ashcroft made a sound that was not quite a sigh, but carried the same weight of theatrical disappointment. He flipped through the file without really reading it. Mr. Crenshaw, you were found sleeping in the doorway of this very courthouse at approximately 4:30 this morning. Is that correct? Yes, sir, Your Honor. The sir landed in the silence of the courtroom like a stone dropped in still water. Ashcroft's eyes narrowed slightly. Most defendants either mumbled or postured. They did not speak with quiet clarity. They did not add honorifics that sounded genuine rather than mocking. In the gallery, a young woman shifted in her seat and raised her phone slightly. Marlena Voss had been covering the courthouse beat for 18 months, documenting the mundane machinery of justice for a legal blog that paid barely enough to cover her rent. She recorded everything as a matter of habit, never knowing which hearing might contain something worth writing about. Something about this one felt different. She was not sure why. Maybe it was the way the old man stood. Maybe it was the almost imperceptible tension in the bailiff's posture. Maybe it was just instinct, the same instinct that had made her become a journalist in the first place. She kept recording. "Do you have representation?" Ashcroft asked. "No, sir." "Do you understand the charges against you?" "Yes, sir." "Trespassing. I was seeking shelter from the storm. It will not happen again." The response was simple and direct. No excuses. No elaborate explanations. No attempt to manipulate or evade. Just facts, delivered with a quiet dignity that seemed almost foreign in this room, where dignity was systematically stripped from everyone who stood at that podium. Ashcroft leaned back in his chair. This was the part he enjoyed, though he would never have admitted it in those terms. The lecture. The moment when he could remind these people exactly where they stood in the order of things and exactly how far they had fallen from any reasonable standard of human behavior. "Mr. Crenshaw," he began, and his voice took on the practiced cadence of a sermon delivered 1,000 times before. "Do you understand what it means to take responsibility for your life? Do you understand that every choice has consequences? You chose to give up. You chose to become a burden on society. You chose to abandon whatever potential you once had and instead rely on the charity of others and the doorways of public buildings." Crenshaw said nothing. His expression did not change. He simply stood and listened with the patience of a man who had endured worse lectures from people who actually had the authority to give them. The silence seemed to irritate Ashcroft. Defendants were supposed to react. They were supposed to hang their heads or bristle with defensive anger. They were not supposed to absorb his words like water hitting stone. He pressed harder. "I see men like you every day. Men who claim circumstances beyond their control. Men who want sympathy for situations they created themselves. Men who have given up on contributing anything meaningful to society and expect the rest of us to carry them." Still nothing. Crenshaw's eyes remained fixed on the judge, attentive but untroubled. Somewhere in the gallery, the stenographer's fingers had slowed on her keyboard. Okafor shifted his weight, watching the exchange with growing unease. That was when Ashcroft noticed the chain around the old man's neck. Thin metal links disappearing beneath the collar of the flannel shirt, just visible where the oversized jacket hung open. "Dog tags." The judge's expression changed. His eyes sharpened with something that looked almost like satisfaction, the look of a predator spotting weakness. "Are those military dog tags, Mr. Crenshaw?" "Yes, sir." "So you claim to be a veteran." The word claim hung in the air, heavy with implication. In the gallery, Marlena Voss adjusted her phone's angle. Okafor's hand moved away from his belt, his attention now fully fixed on the exchange. Crenshaw's voice remained steady. "I served 23 years in the United States Navy, Your Honor." Ashcroft smiled. It was not a kind expression. "Of course you did," he said. "They all do. They all do." The words settled over the courtroom like a cold front moving in. Ashcroft leaned forward in his chair, elbows on the bench, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He had found his angle now, the weakness he could exploit, and his entire demeanor shifted into something more predatory. "I have been on this bench for 31 years, Mr. Crenshaw. 31 years of listening to defendants spin tales designed to earn sympathy. And do you know what story I hear more than any other? The veteran story. The I served my country story. The I sacrificed everything story." He paused, letting the words land. 9 times out of 10, it is fiction. Convenient fiction designed to manipulate judges and juries into leniency. Men who bought their tags at surplus stores. Men who memorized enough terminology to sound convincing. Men who exploit the genuine sacrifices of real veterans to escape consequences for their own failures. In the gallery, an older man in a faded army jacket shifted uncomfortably. His grandson had dragged him to court this morning for a traffic dispute, and now he was watching something that made his stomach turn. Beside him, his grandson stared at his phone, oblivious. Crenshaw remained motionless at the podium. His expression had not changed, but something behind his eyes had gone very still, the way deep water goes still before a storm. Okafor recognized that stillness. He had seen it in men who were about to do violence, though he did not think violence was coming. This was something else. This was a man deciding how much to reveal and how much to keep hidden. Ashcroft continued, warming to his theme. He gestured at Crenshaw's appearance with one manicured hand. Look at yourself. If you truly served 23 years in the military, you would have a pension. You would have benefits. You would have the discipline and skills to maintain employment. Instead, you are sleeping in doorways and standing in my courtroom in clothes that do not fit, claiming a history that conveniently cannot be verified on the spot. The stenographer's hands had stopped moving entirely. She was staring at the judge with an expression that mixed discomfort with something sharper. Her brother had done 3 tours in Afghanistan. He still woke up screaming sometimes. He still could not hold a job for more than a few months at a time. The idea that struggle after service meant the service was fake made her want to stand up and say something she would regret. She said nothing. She was not paid to have opinions. Ashcroft's voice dropped into a tone of false reasonableness. So let us be honest with each other, Mr. Crenshaw. Where did you really get those tags? Did you find them somewhere? Buy them at a pawn shop? Take them off someone who actually earned them? Something flickered across Crenshaw's face. It was there and gone so fast that most people in the courtroom missed it entirely. Okafor did not miss it. Marlena Voss, watching through her phone screen, did not miss it. It was not anger. It was something older and deeper. Something that looked like grief compressed into a single moment. The tags are mine, Your Honor. Crenshaw's voice remained quiet, but something in its quality had changed, a note of steel beneath the softness. I earned them at Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training, Class 127, Coronado, California, December 1980. I wore them for 23 years across 4 continents, and I will wear them until the day I die. Ashcroft's smile widened. He thought he had won something. He thought the old man's defensiveness was a crack he could pry open. Impressive recitation. Very convincing. But anyone can memorize dates and places. Anyone can learn the vocabulary. What you cannot fake, Mr. Crenshaw, is the bearing, the discipline, the pride. He gestured again at the donated clothes, the rope belt, the separated boot soles. Real veterans do not end up like you. Real veterans have too much self-respect. The words hung in the air. In the gallery, the old man in the army jacket had gone pale. His hands gripped his knees so tightly the knuckles showed white. His grandson finally looked up from his phone, sensing something wrong. Okafor took a half-step forward, then stopped himself. He was not sure what he intended to do. Intervene, somehow. Say something. But bailiffs did not interrupt judges, and this was still technically within the bounds of judicial conduct, even if it felt like watching someone kick a dog. Crenshaw stood in the silence that followed the judge's words. For a long moment, he simply breathed, his chest rising and falling with the measured rhythm of a man who had learned to control his body in situations far more stressful than this. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the courtroom. Your Honor, I have stood before men who wanted to kill me. I have lain in positions for days, waiting for a single opportunity. I have held my best friend while he bled out in my arms on a mountainside in Afghanistan. I have buried more brothers than I can count and attended more memorial services than anyone should have to attend. He paused. The courtroom had gone absolutely silent. Even the heating system seemed to have stopped its rattling. You can say whatever you want about my clothes. You can say whatever you want about my circumstances. You can call me a failure and a burden and whatever else makes you feel superior. But I will not stand here and let you say those tags are fake. I will not let you erase 23 years of service because you do not like how I look. Ashcroft's expression hardened. He was not accustomed to being challenged. He was not accustomed to defendants who pushed back with quiet dignity instead of loud desperation. "Is that so?" he said, and his voice had gone cold. "Well, Mr. Crenshaw, I have a very simple solution. Remove the tags." The demand landed like a slap. "Excuse me, Your Honor." "You heard me." Ashcroft's voice rose, playing to the gallery now. "If those tags are so precious, if they represent such sacred service, then you should have no problem removing them temporarily. Unless, of course, they are props. Unless, of course, this entire performance is designed to manipulate this court." He pointed at the defense table. "Remove them. Place them on the table. Let us see what we are really dealing with." The courtroom held its breath. Okafor's hand had moved back to his belt, though he was not sure why. Marlena Voss zoomed in on her phone, capturing the moment. The stenographer sat frozen, fingers hovering over keys she could not bring herself to press. And Elwood Ray Crenshaw, Master Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, retired, stood at the podium and felt the weight of 2 sets of dog tags against his chest. One set his own, one set belonging to a dead man who had died saving his life. "With respect, Your Honor," he said quietly, "I would prefer not to." Ashcroft's face flushed with anger. That was not a request. That was not a request. Judge Ashcroft's voice filled the courtroom, amplified by 31 years of practiced authority. He rose slightly in his seat, robes shifting around him like dark wings. "You are my courtroom, Mr. Crenshaw. You will comply with my instructions, or you will be held in contempt. Do you understand what that means? It means I can have you taken into custody right now. It means additional charges. It means whatever leniency I might have considered for your original offense disappears entirely." He let the threat settle. "Now, remove the tags." Crenshaw stood motionless at the podium. His hands remained at his sides, fingers slightly curled, the posture of a man who had learned to keep his hands visible and non-threatening in situations where sudden movements could get people killed. His breathing stayed even. His expression stayed neutral. But inside, something was tearing. The tags had not left his neck in 24 years. Not when he showered. Not when he slept. Not when he was processed through intake 6 hours ago, though that had required an argument with an officer who eventually relented. They were not jewelry. They were not accessories. They were the last physical connection to a life that had meant something, to a brother who had died believing in him, to a version of himself that had not yet been hollowed out by grief and guilt and the slow erosion of purpose. Taking them off felt like a small death. Taking them off in this room, at the demand of this man, felt like betrayal. But refusing meant contempt charges. Refusing meant more time in custody. Refusing meant proving Ashcroft's point, giving him the confrontation he wanted, the excuse to paint Crenshaw as unstable and aggressive. The calculus was simple. The execution was not. Crenshaw's hands moved to his collar. Slowly, deliberately. Each motion controlled the way every motion had been controlled since December 1980, when he learned that discipline was the difference between operators who came home and operators who came home in boxes. He lifted the chain over his head. 2 sets of tags slid free from beneath his shirt, clinking softly against each other. The sound was small, but it seemed to fill the courtroom, metallic and final. He held them for a moment, just a moment, looking at the stamped letters that spelled out his name, his service number, his blood type, his religion. Looking at the second set, older and smoother, the letters worn down by years of his own fingers tracing them in the dark. Then he stepped forward and placed them on the defense table. The tags lay there on the wood, catching the fluorescent light. 2 chains intertwined. 2 identities reduced to metal and memory. Ashcroft's smile returned. He gestured to Okafor. "Bailiff, examine those tags. Tell me what you see." Okafor did not move immediately. He stood by his station, looking at the tags on the table, then at the old man who had placed them there, then back at the tags. Something was building in his chest, a pressure that felt like the moment before a firefight when every instinct screamed that the situation was about to go sideways. "Bailiff." Ashcroft's voice sharpened. "I gave you an instruction." "Yes, Your Honor." Okafor walked to the defense table. His footsteps echoed in the silence. Every eye in the courtroom tracked his movement. Marlena Voss had stopped breathing, her phone steady, capturing everything. He picked up the tags. The metal was warm for being pressed against Crenshaw's chest. Heavier than he expected. Real tags always were. The cheap replicas sold at surplus stores were stamped too thin, the chains too light. These had the weight of authenticity, the density of something meant to survive combat. He turned them over in his hands. Read the information stamped into the first set. Crenshaw, Elwood, a string of numbers. O positive. Protestant. USN. Standard format. Correct format. The kind of format that had not changed in decades. He looked at the second set. Older. More worn. The edges rounded smooth by years of handling. Montoya, Joaquin D. Another string of numbers. Up negativa. Catholic. USN. And beneath the standard information, something else. Scratches that were not random wear. Scratches that formed numbers etched deliberately into the metal. 34.7219, 69.2018. Coordinates. Okafor's hands began to tremble. He looked up at Crenshaw. The old man met his gaze with eyes that held no anger, no triumph, no accusation. Just a quiet sadness that seemed to go down forever. What do you see, bailiff? Ashcroft's voice cut through the moment. Are they fake? Are they surplus store props like I suspected? Okafor's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. He had served 2 tours in Iraq. He had worked alongside Special Operations Forces on 3 occasions. He had heard stories late at night in forward operating bases about the operators who did the jobs no one talked about. The snipers who could reach out and touch targets at distances that seemed impossible. The men who went into places that did not exist on any map and came back with 1,000-yard stares and medals they could not explain. There was a call sign that came up sometimes in those stories. A ghost story, almost. The shooter who never missed. The one they sent when the shot had to be perfect because there would be no second chance. Spectre. Okafor looked at the coordinates scratched into the second set of tags. He did not know exactly what they marked, but he knew what coordinates on dog tags meant. He knew that men did not etch locations into sacred objects unless those locations marked something that had broken them. Bailiff. Ashcroft's patience was fraying. Answer the question. Okafor turned to face the judge. His voice came out strange, thick with something that was not quite emotion and not quite fear. Your Honor, these tags appear to be authentic. Ashcroft's expression flickered. That was not the answer he wanted. Appear to be. That is not a definitive answer. Anyone can make tags that appear authentic. With respect, Your Honor, Okafor's training was the only thing keeping his voice steady. These are not replicas. The format is correct. The wear pattern is consistent with decades of use. And the second set has coordinates etched into the metal that suggest a location of significant personal importance. He paused, swallowed. I serve in the Marine Corps, Your Honor. I have seen real tags, and I have seen fakes. These are real. The courtroom had gone so quiet that the hum of the fluorescent lights sounded like thunder. Ashcroft sat frozen behind his bench, his script suddenly useless, his certainty cracking. And at the defense table, Elwood Ray Crenshaw stood with empty hands and an emptier chest, watching a stranger hold the last pieces of a life that had meant something, waiting to see what would happen next. The silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Ashcroft stared at his bailiff with an expression caught somewhere between confusion and irritation, a man whose script had suddenly gone missing in the middle of a performance. Real tags do not prove real service, he said finally. His voice had lost some of its thunder, but none of its stubbornness. People inherit tags. People steal tags. People buy authentic vintage tags from estate sales and military collectors. He turned back to Crenshaw, searching for the weakness he had been so certain existed. Those coordinates your bailiff mentioned. What are they? Some location you looked up online to add authenticity to your story. The question hung in the air. In the gallery, Marlena Voss felt her pulse quicken. She had covered enough trials to recognize the moment when a proceeding tipped from routine into something else entirely. The energy in the room had shifted. The other defendants waiting for their cases had stopped fidgeting. The stenographer's hands hovered over a keyboard like birds frozen in mid-flight. Crenshaw looked at the tags, still held in Okafor's trembling hands. When he spoke, his voice was different. Quieter, flatter. The voice of a man reading coordinates off a map in the dark, calling in positions, reporting casualties. 34.7219 degrees north. 69.2018 degrees east. The numbers fell into the silence like stones into deep water. Hindu Kush Mountains. Nangarhar Province. Afghanistan. Ashcroft opened his mouth to interrupt. Crenshaw continued as if he had not moved. March 14, 2001. Insertion at 0347 hours. Two-man team. Overwatch position established at grid reference 742. Elevation 3,200 meters. Mission designation classified. Target designation classified. Rules of engagement classified. His eyes had gone distant, focused on something none of them could see, something that existed only in memory and nightmare. I was the shooter. Petty Officer First Class Joaquin Delgado Montoya was my spotter. We had worked together for 11 years. He was the best spotter in naval special warfare. He could read wind at distances that made meteorologists jealous. He could calculate holdover in his head faster than most men could punch numbers into a computer. Okafor's grip on the tags tightened. He knew where this was going. He did not want to know, but he knew. The shot was 1,847 meters. Crenshaw's voice remained flat, clinical, but something underneath, it was cracking. At that distance, the bullet flight time was 2.7 seconds. Target acquired at 0612 hours. Shot taken at 0614 hours. Target eliminated. He paused, drew a breath that seemed to cost him something. Position compromised at 0615 hours. Enemy response from 3 directions. RPG and automatic weapons fire. Standard displacement protocol. Shooter moves, spotter covers. Another pause. Longer this time. Joaquin, cover my displacement. He drew fire so I could reach the extraction point. 200 meters out, I heard the impact. I went back. The courtroom had ceased to exist. There was only the old man's voice and the story it carried. A story that painted pictures none of them wanted to see. I found him in the rocks. Chest wound. Femoral artery severed by shrapnel. Field medicine was not going to save him, and we both knew it. I held pressure anyway. Watched him bleed out in 94 seconds. Crenshaw's eyes refocused. He looked directly at Ashcroft. His last words were that it was not my fault. He made me promise to tell his sister that he tried. Then he died in my arms on a mountainside in a country where we were not officially present, conducting an operation that does not officially exist, and I carried his body 4 kilometers to the extraction point because I was not going to leave him there. The judge had gone pale. His manicured hands gripped the edge of his bench, knuckles white. Those coordinates, Crenshaw continued, are scratched into his tags because that is where he died. That is where I failed him. That is the location I see every time I close my eyes and every time I open them again. He pointed at the tags in Okafor's hands. Those are not props, Your Honor. Those are not costume pieces. Those are the only thing I have left of the best friend I ever had. And you made me take them off so you could prove a point about homeless people. In the gallery, someone was crying. Soft, muffled sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. The old man in the army jacket had his head bowed, shoulders shaking. His grandson had put away his phone and was staring at Crenshaw with an expression of dawning horror. Marlena Voss kept recording. Her hands were steady, even though her vision was blurring. She understood now what she was capturing. This was not just a story. This was a man being forced to tear open wounds that had never healed so a judge could feel superior about donated clothes and rope belts. Okafor stepped forward. He moved without thinking, driven by something deeper than procedure. Your Honor, he said, and his voice cracked on the words. If what this man is saying is true, and I believe it is, then he served at the highest levels of naval special warfare. The units he is describing do not discuss their operations. They do not seek recognition. They do not explain themselves to anyone who does not have clearance to know. He looked down at the tags in his hands. I have heard stories, Your Honor. In Iraq, late at night, when special operators would talk among themselves, thinking nobody else was listening. Stories about a sniper with a call sign. Stories about shots that should not have been possible. Stories about a man who never missed. He turned to Crenshaw. Spectre. The word came out broken, weighted with something that might have been awe or grief or both. That was the call sign, was it not? You were Spectre. Crenshaw said nothing. He did not need to. His silence was confirmation enough. Okafor turned back to Ashcroft. His voice had found strength now, the strength of a man who understood exactly what he was witnessing and refused to let it be diminished. Your Honor, with respect, you have made a mistake. This man is not a fraud. This man is not a con artist. This man is a decorated combat veteran who has served his country in ways that you and I cannot begin to understand. He held up the tags, and you made him remove these. You made him prove himself in a public courtroom. You made him relive the worst moment of his life because you did not like how he was dressed. The words landed like hammer blows. Ashcroft flinched with each one. I do not know what the proper procedure is here, Your Honor. I do not know what happens next. But I know that what has happened in this courtroom today is wrong. And I think everyone in this room knows it too. The courtroom existed in a kind of suspended animation. No one moved. No one spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless single note, and somewhere in the building a door closed with a distant thump. But inside this room, time itself seemed to have stopped breathing. Ashcroft sat behind his bench like a man who had just watched the ground open beneath his feet. His face had lost all color. His hands, those manicured hands that had never known manual labor, trembled against the dark wood. 31 years of certainty had crumbled in the space of minutes, and the rubble was still settling. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He began and then stopped. The word hung there, orphaned and useless. Crenshaw watched him struggle. There was no satisfaction in the old man's expression. No triumph. Just the same quiet sadness that had been there from the beginning, the sadness of a man who had learned long ago that winning and losing were just different kinds of pain. Okafor still held the dog tags. He had not moved from his position near the defense table, had not returned to his station by the bench. Some part of him understood that returning to his post meant returning to normal procedure, and nothing about this moment was normal. In the gallery, Marlena Voss slowly lowered her phone. She had been recording for nearly 20 minutes now, capturing everything, but suddenly the act of documentation felt inadequate. Some moments were too large for screens. Some truths demanded more than pixels and data. The old man in the army jacket raised his head. Tears still tracked down weathered cheeks, but his eyes had found something they had been looking for without knowing it. He looked at Crenshaw the way a man looks at a mirror, seeing his own experience reflected in a stranger's story. His grandson sat beside him in silence, 19 years old, and suddenly aware that the world contained depths he had never bothered to consider. The stenographer's hands finally moved. She began typing, slowly at first, then faster, transcribing what had already been said. The record would exist. Whatever else happened, the record would exist. Ashcroft found his voice. It came out smaller than before, stripped of its theatrical resonance. Mr. Crenshaw, he said, I may have been too hasty in my assessment. The words were meant as concession. They landed as insult. Too hasty. As if the systematic humiliation of a combat veteran was merely a procedural error, a scheduling conflict, a minor miscalculation. Crenshaw's expression did not change. He had heard worse apologies. He had heard no apologies at all from people who owed far larger ones. A judge admitting haste was more than most powerful men ever offered. But Okafor was not finished. Too hasty, he repeated. His voice had an edge now, something forged in a rocky heat and refined by 12 years of watching justice dispense itself unequally. Your Honor, you accused this man of fraud. You accused him of stolen valor. You made him remove sacred objects from his body so you could examine them like evidence. And now you offer too hasty. Bailiff. Ashcroft's voice found a fragment of its old authority. You are out of line. With respect, Your Honor, I'm exactly where I need to be. Okafor turned to face the gallery. He held up the dog tags so everyone could see them. Two chains intertwined, two sets of metal that represented everything the nation claimed to honor. This man served 23 years in the United States Navy. This man deployed to combat zones that most Americans cannot find on a map. This man lost his best friend and carried that body through hostile territory rather than leave it behind. He turned back to the judge, and when he fell on hard times, when the weight of what he had done and seen became too heavy to carry, when the system that was supposed to catch him failed, he ended up sleeping in a doorway. Our doorway. The doorway of a courthouse that is supposed to represent justice. The word justice hung in the air like an accusation. So you tell me, Your Honor, you tell me, and everyone in this room, is this justice? Is this what we mean when we say we honor our veterans? Is this what those flags on the wall are supposed to represent? Ashcroft had no answer. For perhaps the first time in 31 years, he had no answer at all. Crenshaw finally moved. He stepped forward slowly and extended his hand toward Okafor. May I have them back? He asked quietly. Okafor looked at the tags in his hands. For a moment something passed between the two men, a recognition that transcended rank and branch and circumstance. Marine and sailor, bailiff and defendant. Two men who had both worn uniforms and carried burdens that civilians could not understand. He placed the tags gently into Crenshaw's palm. Thank you for your service, he said. The words were simple, but the way he said them was not. It was not the hollow phrase that politicians offered at campaign rallies. It was an acknowledgement from one veteran to another, weighted with genuine understanding. Crenshaw nodded. He lifted the chains over his head and let the tags fall back against his chest where they belonged. The weight settled against his sternum, familiar and necessary. The courtroom remained frozen. Ashcroft sat paralyzed behind his bench. The gallery watched in collective silence. The stenographer typed steadily, preserving every moment. And somewhere in the back of the room, a door opened. Heads turned. A woman entered, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who belonged in courtrooms. Dark suit, briefcase, the bearing of an attorney who had seen enough to be surprised by nothing. She stopped just inside the door, surveying the scene. Her eyes moved from the pale-faced judge to the rigid bailiff to the old man in donated clothes who stood at the defense table with dog tags gleaming against his flannel shirt. She took a breath. Your Honor, she said, her voice cutting through the stillness. My name is Patricia Okonkwo. I am a public defender with the Veterans Legal Assistance Project. I received a call about this case approximately 15 minutes ago from someone in your gallery. She glanced at Marlena Voss, who lowered her eyes. I am here to represent Mr. Crenshaw, and based on what I've been told, I believe we have significant matters to discuss regarding how this proceeding has been conducted. Ashcroft's face went from pale to gray. The clock on the wall ticked forward. The story was far from over. Patricia Okonkwo walked down the center aisle with the measured pace of someone who understood the power of timing. Every eye in the courtroom tracked her movement. She carried her briefcase like a weapon she had not yet decided whether to deploy. Your Honor, she said again, stopping at the bar that separated the gallery from the well of the court. I apologize for the interruption, but I believe my client's rights may have been compromised during these proceedings. Ashcroft's hands gripped the edge of his bench. The word client landed like a verdict he had not been prepared to hear. This man did not have representation when this hearing began, he said. His voice was strained, searching for procedural ground to stand on. He waived his right to counsel. Patricia tilted her head slightly. A waiver obtained from a defendant who has been subjected to public humiliation and coerced into removing personal effects may not constitute valid informed consent. Your Honor, I would like to request a brief recess to confer with my client before this proceeding continues. The request was reasonable. The implication behind it was not. She was putting markers down, establishing a record, building something that could be referenced later in context far more serious than a trespassing misdemeanor. Ashcroft recognized the strategy. 31 years on the bench had taught him to read attorneys the way Okafor read defendants. This woman was not here to negotiate a plea deal. She was here to document, to witness, to ensure that whatever happened next happened on the record and in the light. He had two choices: grant the recess and allow time for the situation to be analyzed, strategized, potentially weaponized against him, or deny the recess and add another layer to what was rapidly becoming a very thick file of questionable judicial conduct. Neither option was good. 5 minutes, he said finally. The words came out clipped, reluctant. Thank you, Your Honor. Patricia pushed through the gate and approached Crenshaw at the defense table. She extended her hand, and he shook it, his grip firm despite the circumstances. Mr. Crenshaw, she said quietly, pitching her voice below the range of the gallery. I am truly here to help. I work with veterans who find themselves in legal difficulties. A colleague forwarded me a video that is apparently already circulating online, and I came as quickly as I could. Video, Crenshaw repeated. Patricia glanced toward the gallery where Marlena Voss sat with her phone still in her hands. Screen dark, but recording saved. I believe you have been filmed throughout this proceeding. The footage is already being shared. By this evening, it will likely be seen by thousands. By tomorrow, potentially millions. Crenshaw absorbed this information with the same stillness he had maintained throughout the hearing. His expression revealed nothing. I did not ask for that, he said. No, but it happened. And it means that what occurs in the next few minutes will matter beyond this courtroom. Patricia paused, choosing her words carefully. The judge has made serious errors today. Errors that could constitute grounds for judicial review. But pursuing that path requires your cooperation. It requires you to be willing to tell your story again, on record, in settings where it could be preserved and acted upon. She met his eyes directly. What do you want, Mr. Crenshaw? What outcome would actually help you? The question hung between them. In the gallery, whispered conversations had begun as the recess stretched. Marlena Voss was typing rapidly on her phone, already drafting the post that would accompany the video. The old man in the army jacket had leaned over to speak quietly with his grandson, explaining things the young man had never bothered to learn. Okafor stood at his station, watching everything, saying nothing. What do I want? Crenshaw repeated slowly. He looked down at his hands, weathered and scarred, the hands of a man who had built and destroyed in equal measure. I want to stop being invisible, but not like this. Not because a video made people angry for 5 minutes before they scroll to the next thing. He raised his eyes to meet Patricia's. I want the men sleeping under bridges tonight to still matter tomorrow when the cameras are gone. I want the VA to answer their phones. I want judges to look at donated clothes and see human beings instead of inconveniences. He paused. But mostly I want to visit my friend's name at the memorial without feeling like I failed him by still being alive. And no courtroom can give me that. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. In her years of advocacy, she had heard many things from many clients. Anger, despair, demands for vengeance. Rarely had she heard something so simple and so impossible. I cannot give you that either, she said finally. But I can make sure that what happened here today has consequences. I can make sure the man who humiliated you answers for it. And I can connect you with resources that might help carry some of that weight you have been carrying alone. Crenshaw considered this. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The clock on the wall marked the passing seconds of the recess. I broke the law, he said. I was trespassing. That part is true. You were seeking shelter from a storm that could have killed you. That context matters. Does it? Crenshaw asked. The question was genuine, not rhetorical. He had spent so long believing he deserved nothing that the concept of deserving something had become foreign. Patricia nodded. It matters. You matter. What you did for this country matters. And what was done to you in this courtroom matters most of all. She turned to glance at Ashcroft, who sat behind his bench in pale-faced silence, watching them confer. The recess is almost over, she said. When we resume, I'm going to request that all charges be dismissed. I am going to cite the coercive and prejudicial conduct of this proceeding. And I'm going to make sure that every word is on the record. She paused. The judge can fight it. He probably will. But he is going to lose, Mr. Crenshaw. Maybe not today. Maybe not this week. But he is going to lose. Because what he did to you is indefensible. And now there are witnesses. Now, there is video. Now there is a record that cannot be erased. Crenshaw looked at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression, something that might have been the first distant cousin of hope he had felt in years. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's see what happens next." The recess ended with a tap of Ashcroft's gavel, though the sound lacked its usual authority. It landed soft and uncertain, the gesture of a man going through motions he no longer controlled. "Are counsel and defendant ready to proceed?" he asked. The question was directed at Patricia, but his eyes kept sliding toward Crenshaw, toward the dog tags now visible against the flannel shirt, toward the evidence of his miscalculation hanging in plain sight. "We are, Your Honor." Patricia stepped forward, positioning herself between Crenshaw and the bench. At this time, the defense moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Elwood Ray Crenshaw. Ashcroft blinked. "On what grounds?" Patricia opened her briefcase and withdrew a legal pad covered in handwritten notes. She had been preparing during the recess, building her case with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "Multiple grounds, Your Honor. First, the defendant was subjected to prejudicial treatment based on his appearance and housing status. Treatment which created a coercive environment that compromised his ability to receive fair adjudication. Second, the defendant was compelled to remove personal effects, specifically military dog tags of significant personal and historical value, as a condition of having his claims of service taken seriously. Third, the defendant was publicly accused of stolen valor without any evidence to support such accusations, accusations which constitute defamation if made outside the protections of judicial proceedings." She paused to let each point settle. "Fourth, the conduct of this proceeding has been documented by multiple witnesses and at least one video recording, creating a substantial record that will be available for judicial review. Fifth, the original charge of trespassing occurred in the context of the defendant seeking shelter from life-threatening weather conditions, a mitigating circumstance that warrants dismissal in the interest of justice." The gallery had gone silent again. Every word Patricia spoke landed with weight, each one another brick in a wall that was closing in around the judge's bench. Ashcroft's face had progressed through several shades during her recitation, pale to gray to something that approached green. He was a man watching his own destruction being constructed in real time, each legal phrase another nail in a coffin he had built himself. "Counselor," he began, and his voice cracked slightly. "These are serious allegations. They are serious facts, Your Honor." Patricia's tone remained measured, professional, but something fierce burned beneath the surface. "My client served this nation for 23 years at the highest levels of military service. He participated in operations that most Americans will never know occurred. He watched his closest friend die in his arms during a mission that does not officially exist. And when he found himself in crisis, when the weight of that service became too heavy to bear alone, he was arrested for trying to survive a winter storm and then humiliated in open court by a judge who decided his clothing revealed his character." She stepped closer to the bench. "I have been practicing law for 14 years, Your Honor. I have seen many things in many courtrooms, but I have never seen a defendant treated with the contempt I witnessed in the video of this proceeding. I have never seen a judge demand that a veteran remove his dog tags as proof of authenticity. I have never seen someone forced to describe the death of their battle buddy as the price of being believed." Her voice hardened. "What happened here today was not justice. It was cruelty dressed in judicial robes. And whether these charges are dismissed now or later, whether you retain your position on this bench or not, what happened here today will be remembered. It will be discussed. It will be used as an example of exactly how our system fails the men and women who served." The courtroom held its breath. Okafor stood motionless at his station, his face carefully neutral, but something in his posture had straightened. He was witnessing something rare. He was witnessing power being held accountable. Marlena Voss had raised her phone again, recording the moment. She understood now that she was not just documenting a story. She was documenting history. The old man in the army jacket had stopped crying. He sat upright, shoulders back, watching Patricia with an expression that mixed gratitude with something fiercer. Pride, perhaps. Vindication. His grandson sat beside him, phone forgotten, seeing his grandfather and every veteran like him in a new light. The stenographer typed steadily, her fingers flying across the keys. Every word preserved, every moment captured, the record that could not be erased growing longer with each passing second. Ashcroft sat frozen behind his bench. His options had narrowed to a single point. He could fight the dismissal motion, extend the proceeding, create more opportunities for Patricia to build her case against him. Or he could yield, grant the dismissal, and hope that capitulation might soften what was coming. Neither path led anywhere good. But one path led somewhere less catastrophic than the other. He picked up his gavel, held it for a moment, feeling its weight. "The motion to dismiss is granted," he said. His voice was barely audible. "All charges against the defendant are dismissed. Court is adjourned." The gavel fell one final time, but the sound was swallowed by something larger. A ripple of movement in the gallery as people shifted, stood, began to process what they had witnessed. Marlena Voss was already typing, preparing the post that would accompany the video. The old Army veteran had risen to his feet and was making his way toward the aisle, toward Crenshaw, toward the man whose story had unlocked something in his own heart. Okafor stepped away from his station. He crossed the courtroom floor to where Crenshaw stood, with Patricia still processing the fact that he was free. The bailiff extended his hand. "Master Chief," he said. It was the first time anyone had used Crenshaw's rank. The word carried weight. It was not welcome home. It was not thank you for your service. It was an acknowledgement of who he was, stripped of pity, offered with respect. Crenshaw shook his hand. "Sergeant," he replied, reading Okafor's Marine Corps service in his bearing. Two veterans, standing in the ruins of a proceeding that had tried to diminish one of them and had instead revealed the truth. Behind them, Ashcroft gathered his papers with shaking hands and retreated through the door behind the bench. He did not know it yet, but he would never sit in this courtroom again. The video hit the internet at 11:47 a.m., 43 minutes after Ashcroft's gavel fell for the final time. Marlena Voss posted it with a simple caption: "Watch what happened in courtroom 7 this morning. Then decide if this is justice." By noon it had 6,000 shares. By 3 o'clock it had crossed 100,000 views and was climbing faster than anything Marlena had ever posted. Comments flooded in from around the world. Veterans identifying themselves by branch and years of service. Family members of service members expressing outrage. Civilians who had never worn a uniform but recognized injustice when they saw it. By 6 o'clock, the major networks had picked up the story. Cable news ran segments with the video playing on loop behind anchors who spoke in grave tones about respect and sacrifice and systemic failures. The hashtag Justice for Spectre began trending nationally. By midnight, the video had been viewed over 2 million times and showed no signs of slowing. Crenshaw knew none of this. He had walked out of the courthouse into the February cold with Patricia's card in his pocket and nowhere particular to go. The shelter would not open for hours. The memorial was across town. His usual spot under the bridge felt wrong somehow, too small to contain what had just happened. So he walked. The city moved around him in its usual rhythms. People hurrying to lunch meetings and afternoon appointments, phones pressed to ears, eyes fixed on destinations that mattered to them. Nobody looked at the old man in the donated jacket. Nobody recognized the face that was at that moment being broadcast into millions of homes. Invisible again, but differently now. The invisibility felt temporary, a pause between chapters rather than a permanent condition. He found himself at the Navy Memorial as the afternoon light began to fade. The plaza was quiet. A few tourists taking photographs. A veteran in a wheelchair being pushed by what looked like his daughter. A group of Navy enlisted in dress blues, probably in town for some ceremony, taking turns posing by the lone sailor statue. Crenshaw approached the wall where the names were etched. Thousands of them, organized by conflict and date. He knew exactly where to look. His fingers found the letters without conscious direction, muscle memory from 1,000 previous visits. Joaquin Delgado Montoya. The metal was cold beneath his fingertips. He traced each letter the way he always did, a ritual of remembrance that had become as essential as breathing. "Something happened today, brother," he said quietly. His voice was pitched below the range of passers-by, meant only for the name on the wall. "A judge wanted me to prove I knew you. Wanted me to prove I earned these tags. So I told them. I told them about the mountain, about the shot, about the 94 seconds. He paused. The enlisted sailors had moved on. The tourist with the camera had wandered toward a different section. For a moment, he was alone with the name. "I do not know what happens next," he continued. "There is a lawyer now. People saw what happened. Apparently, there is a video that a lot of people are watching. They seem angry on my behalf." He almost smiled. "Almost. You would hate it. All the attention. You always said the best operations were the ones nobody ever heard about. The ones where you go in quiet and come out quieter, and the only people who know are the ones who need to know." His hand flattened against the wall, palm pressed to the cold bronze. "But maybe being quiet is not always the right answer. Maybe some things need to be loud. Maybe the guys sleeping under bridges tonight need someone to make noise on their behalf, even if making noise feels wrong." The afternoon shadows lengthened across the plaza. The temperature was dropping as the sun sank toward the horizon. In a few hours, the memorial would close, and he would need to find somewhere to sleep. But not under a bridge. Not tonight. Patricia had given him more than a business card. She had given him an address. A place called the Reintegration Center, run by a retired Navy commander named Ruth O'Yelleran. Not VA. Not government. Just a place where veterans could show up without paperwork or appointments, or having to explain themselves to people who would not understand anyway. "The door stays open," Patricia had said. "Whether you walk through it is up to you." Crenshaw had not committed to anything. He had taken the card and nodded, and said he would think about it. But standing here now, hand pressed against the name of the man who had died saving his life, he understood something he had been avoiding for 4 years. Joaquin had not died so that Crenshaw could disappear. Joaquin had shoved him toward the extraction point and drawn fire, and taken the hit because he believed Crenshaw's life was worth saving. Every day that Crenshaw spent punishing himself for surviving was a day he proved Joaquin wrong. And Joaquin was never wrong. "Okay, brother," Crenshaw whispered. "Okay, I will try." He lifted his hand from the wall. The name remained, etched in bronze, permanent and unchanging. But something in Crenshaw had shifted. Some weight had redistributed. The guilt was still there, would probably always be there, but it was no longer the only thing. He turned away from the memorial and began walking. The Reintegration Center was on the other side of the city. It would take over an hour on foot. But Elwood Ray Crenshaw had walked farther than that, carrying a body through hostile territory, and he had done it alone. This time he was walking towards something instead of away from it. That made all the difference. The Reintegration Center occupied a converted warehouse on the industrial edge of the city. Nothing about it looked official. No government seals on the door. No flags flanking the entrance. Just a plain metal building with a hand-painted sign that read "Warriors Welcome" and a single light burning above the door. Crenshaw stood across the street for 10 minutes, watching. Old habits. Assess the terrain before committing to the approach. Note the exits. Observe the patterns of movement. A few people came and went during his surveillance. Men mostly, though he saw 2 women as well. Some in worn clothes like his own. Others in jeans and work boots that suggested employment. All of them moved with a particular awareness, a way of scanning their surroundings that marked them as surely as any insignia. Veterans. Every one of them. The door opened and a woman emerged. She was perhaps 60, dark-skinned, with close-cropped gray hair and a bearing that suggested decades of command. She wore civilian clothes, but everything about her posture said Navy. She stood on the threshold and looked directly across the street, directly at Crenshaw, as if she had known he was there all along. She did not wave. She did not call out. She simply stood there, present and patient, making it clear that the next move was his. Crenshaw crossed the street. Up close, she was shorter than he expected, barely reaching his shoulder, but her presence filled the space in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. Her eyes were dark and sharp and kind all at once. The eyes of someone who had seen everything and judged nothing. "Elwood Crenshaw," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am. I am Ruth O'Yelleran, Commander, United States Navy, retired." She extended her hand, and he shook it, feeling calluses that surprised him. Officer hands are usually soft. Hers were not. "I saw the video. I suspect most of the country has seen it by now." Crenshaw nodded. He did not know what to say. Ruth studied him for a moment. Then she stepped aside and gestured toward the open door. "No paperwork tonight," she said. "No intake forms. No questions you do not want to answer. Just coffee if you want it and a chair if you need it. The rest can wait until you're ready." He hesitated on the threshold. For years of avoiding exactly this kind of help. For years of believing he did not deserve it. The momentum of that belief was powerful, a current that wanted to pull him back toward the bridge and the familiar comfort of self-punishment. But Joaquin's name was still warm on his fingertips, and the promise he had made at the memorial was only an hour old. He walked through the door. The interior was simple. Folding chairs arranged in a rough circle. A coffee station against one wall. A few couches that had seen better days, but looked comfortable. American flag in one corner, POWMIA flag beside it. No decorations. No motivational posters. Just a space that existed for a purpose and did not pretend to be anything else. A dozen people occupied the room. Some sat in the circle, talking quietly. Others stood by the coffee station or sat alone on the couches. All of them looked up when Crenshaw entered. All of them assessed him with the quick glance of people accustomed to evaluating strangers for threat. None of them stared. None of them asked questions. They looked, they categorized, they returned to their conversations. The acceptance was automatic, extended without conditions. Ruth guided him to the coffee station, handed him a cup without asking if he wanted one. The coffee was strong and hot, and tasted like it had been made by someone who understood that coffee was fuel, not luxury. "We do not have a program here," Ruth said quietly. "Not in the traditional sense. No 12 steps. No mandatory meetings. No bureaucracy deciding who qualifies and who does not." She sipped her own coffee. "What we have is a door that stays open. People who understand without needing explanations. And time. However much time someone needs to figure out what comes next." Crenshaw held the cup in both hands, absorbing the warmth. "When did you start this?" he asked. 12 years ago." Ruth's eyes went distant for a moment. "I lost my executive officer to suicide after we came home from our third deployment. Best officer I ever served with. Nobody saw it coming because nobody was looking. Because the system was too busy processing paperwork to notice that a man was drowning." She refocused on Crenshaw. "I decided paperwork was not going to be the reason I lost anyone else." The room continued its quiet rhythms around them. Conversations rising and falling. The clink of coffee cups. The creak of folding chairs. Outside, the city went about its evening business, oblivious to the small community gathered in this unremarkable building. "There's a room in back," Ruth said. "Cot, clean sheets, bathroom down the hall. It is yours tonight if you want it. No strings. No expectations. Just a bed." Crenshaw looked at her. The offer was simple, but the weight of it was immense. A bed. A door that locked. A space that was his, even if only for one night. "Why?" he asked. The question covered everything. Why the center? Why the offer? Why any of it? Ruth smiled. It was the first time he had seen her smile, and it transformed her face from commanding to something warmer. "Because someone did it for me once," she said. "When I was too proud and too broken to ask for help, someone opened a door and waited for me to walk through it. That is how this works. We carry each other until we can walk on our own again. Then we turn around and carry someone else." She placed a hand on his shoulder. The touch was brief but solid, an anchor in a sea he had been drowning in for years. "Welcome home, Master Chief," she said. The words broke something loose in Crenshaw's chest. Not pain, something older and deeper. Something that had been frozen for 24 years and was finally, slowly, beginning to thaw. He did not cry. He was not ready for that yet. But he nodded, and he drank his coffee, And when Ruth showed him to the small room with the cot and the clean sheets, he lay down on a mattress for the first time in 4 years. He slept without dreaming. 6 months later, Elwood Ray Crenshaw stood before a circle of veterans in the same warehouse where Ruth O'Yelleran had welcomed him home. The folding chairs were filled. Some faces he recognized from his first night. Others were new, men and women who had found their way here through the same invisible current that had carried him. He was not the same man who had walked through that door in February. The donated jacket was gone, replaced by clothes that fit. The rope belt was gone. The separated boot soles were gone. But more than the external changes, something in his posture had shifted. He still stood with military bearing, still moved with the economy of a man trained to eliminate waste in every motion. But the weight he carried had redistributed. It no longer crushed him. It had become something he could bear. "My name is Elwood," he said. His voice was steady, pitched to carry without shouting. Call sign was Spectre. "I served 23 years in naval special warfare, and I spent 4 years sleeping under a bridge because I believed I did not deserve anything else." The room was silent, attentive. No one shifted in their seats. No one checked their phones. They understood the cost of speaking these words because they had paid similar costs themselves. "I lost my best friend on a mountainside in Afghanistan. He died covering my displacement. His last words were that it was not my fault, but I spent 2 decades believing he was wrong. I thought punishing myself was the same thing as honoring him. I thought disappearing was what I deserved." He paused. Let the words settle. I was wrong. Joaquin did not die, so I could waste the life he saved. He died believing I was worth saving. Every day I spent under that bridge, I was proving him wrong. And Joaquin was never wrong. A few quiet laughs from the circle. The kind of laughter that comes from recognition, from shared experience, from understanding exactly what he meant. 6 months ago, a judge demanded I remove my dog tags in open court. He called the props. He said real veterans do not end up like me. He was wrong about the tags, but he was right about one thing. I had given up. I had stopped fighting. I had let the guilt win. Crenshaw touched the tags beneath his shirt. Both sets. Always both sets. That day in the courtroom, I had a choice. I could keep disappearing, or I could start coming back. I chose to come back. Not because I had figured anything out. Not because the guilt was gone. But because someone opened a door and waited for me to walk through it. He looked at Ruth, standing by the coffee station. She nodded once, a small acknowledgement. That is what we do here. We open doors. We wait. We do not judge, and we do not push. We just make sure the door stays open until someone is ready. He addressed the room directly now, making eye contact with each person in turn. Some of you are ready. Some of you are not. That is okay. I was not ready for 4 years. But I am here now. And if I can come back from where I was, so can you. Not because you are strong. Not because you have figured it out. But because the door is open and the people inside understand. The session continued for another hour. Others spoke. Stories of loss and recovery, of falls and first steps back. When it ended, the veterans dispersed slowly, some heading to the transitional housing that Ruth had helped them find, others to jobs that the Center's network had connected them with, others simply back into the city with the knowledge that this place existed when they needed it. Crenshaw stayed to help fold chairs. He did this after every session now. Small tasks, useful tasks, the kind of tasks that reminded him he could still contribute something. Ruth approached as he stacked the last chair against the wall. "Visitor for you," she said. "Came in while you were speaking. Did not want to interrupt." Crenshaw turned. A woman stood by the door. Navy uniform. Yoin Sainya. Dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Eyes that held something complicated, something that mixed grief with hope. Lieutenant Commander Sophia Montoya. She had reached out 3 months ago, after seeing the video, after recognizing her brother's name in Crenshaw's recitation. They had exchanged letters. Careful letters. Each one peeling back another layer of a shared history neither had fully understood. But this was the first time they had met in person. Crenshaw crossed the room. He did not know what to say. 24 years of carrying her brother's memory, and now she stood before him, wearing the same uniform Joaquin had worn, looking at him with eyes that held no accusation. "Master Chief," she said. Commander. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Sophia reached in her pocket and withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age, edges worn soft by handling. My brother wrote this 2 weeks before he died, she said. It arrived after the notification. I have read it 1,000 times, but I think you need to read it too. Crenshaw took the envelope. His hands trembled slightly as he withdrew the letter. Joaquin's handwriting, familiar from years of shared operational notes and mission planning. The words blurred as he read, tears he had not been able to shed for 24 years finally finding their way free. The letter spoke of many things, of the mission ahead, of concerns about the intelligence, of a sister back home who was too smart to waste her life on anything but something meaningful. But near the end, a paragraph that seemed to reach across time directly to this moment. If anything happens to me, do not let Woody blame himself. He'll try. That is who he is. He carries everything. But this is not his fault. None of it is. And if he is reading this somehow, if you found a way to get this to him, tell him I said to stop being an idiot and go live his life. He has earned it. We all have. Crenshaw lowered the letter. The tears came freely now, silent streams cutting tracks down weathered cheeks. Sophia stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, a sister embracing the man who had held her brother at the end. He tried to tell me, Crenshaw whispered. 94 seconds, and he spent them trying to tell me it was not my fault. He was right, Sophia said. It took you 24 years, but you finally heard him. They stood there in the empty warehouse, 2 people connected by love for a man who had died believing in both of them. Outside, the city continued its rhythms. Somewhere, Judge Ashcroft was completing his community service at a veterans outreach program, the terms of his resignation agreement. Somewhere, Marlena Voss was working on a documentary about homeless veterans that would air nationally in the fall. Somewhere, Okafor was testifying before a judicial review board about courtroom conduct. And here, in this unremarkable building with a hand-painted sign, the door stayed open. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that second chances are possible and that heroes walk among us in places we least expect, please consider subscribing to our channel. And tell us in the comments, who is the quiet hero in your life? Who deserves to be seen? Because everyone has a story. Everyone carries something. And sometimes the greatest act of courage is not charging into enemy fire. Sometimes it is simply accepting help. Sometimes it is walking through a door that someone left open for you. Thank you for watching. Crenshaw returned to the memorial that evening. He traced Joaquin's name one more time, but the gesture had changed. It was no longer mourning. It was reporting in. Still here, brother. Still trying. And I finally heard you. The bronze was warm beneath his fingers. The sun set over the city. And somewhere in the distance, a door stayed open, waiting for the next veteran who needed to find their way home.